On the episode today, I have Ejieme Eromosele, VP of Customer Growth at Quick. Ejieme is also the founder of Success in Black, which is a community advancing DEI in customer success and supporting Black professionals in building thriving careers. She is the co-author of the Customer Success Talent Playbook. She is a two-time top customer success influencer and a great person to have a chat with. I am thrilled to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on. Excited to dig into the topic today.
Yeah, same here. And so you know the format. We get into one of those blind spots, those challenges that you faced in the trenches. But maybe before we get too deep into the weeds, can you set the stage for kind of when this problem arose? What was the company like? What was your stage and your team like?
Yeah, so I was with my prior startup. Quick ended up acquiring them, but it was called Snaps. And in my role, I was the VP of Customer Success. We were a few years old, just under kind of 5 million in revenue, but a quite, I think, large CS team for good reason. So the product itself was delivering conversational AI. So we were helping large enterprise brands deliver conversational AI. So basically bots to their customers. So highly technical enterprise obviously means, high touch. And so I had a team of CSMs, two directors, one here in New York and another on the West Coast in LA, and a team of about 7 or 8 CSMs at the time. And so, at that time, so the CS organization, we owned everything from onboarding through to also renewals, and we partnered with our account management team on expansions.
Hmm.
CSM specifically, we're responsible for everything from the strategic relationship management, of course, project management, conversational design, because we were essentially building these bots for our customers. But then, of course, all of the other more strategic CSM activities like success planning and revenue realization. So we sort of own the end-to-end customer journey from the initial sale.
Yeah, so it's something you hear a lot of, especially in that stage of CS owning a
All the
lot of responsibility. So it seems like whatever this problem is, seems like you did a decent job solving it. Would love to get into that. Like, what was the problem that came up? How did it show up?
Yeah, so on paper, I think the fact that the CSM owned the relationship through was good. We also had a professional services team, but they were primarily focused on our integration. So if we needed to integrate to another system, but CSMs would even like design the bots, they would configure it in the tool, which also meant that they were pretty technical. They knew how to use the product pretty well, which I know is also an issue sometimes in CS organizations when the CSM maybe is too far removed from the product itself and is not necessarily a product expert. So again, on
Hmm.
paper, it's good. We had CSMs that owned the whole journey. They were product experts, but where we started to see some challenges was actually in the deployment and in the maintenance of those bots. I mean, this was back before ChatGPT, right? So I think people now have an appreciation that AI, you can't just like set it and forget it. It has to be
Yeah.
tuned. You have to kind of monitor it. But back then, it was still early days in AI. So, our customer would get happy. They wanted bots. We'd build them a bot. It performed well, but over time that performance degraded. And so we
Hmm.
started to see that, we were getting support tickets for our customers saying, hey, the bot's not like responding in the same way it was, even just a week ago. Like, what's going on? Like, we need help to fix this. And so CSMs were spending a lot more time in the reactive handling of going back, making updates, getting content. So again, this was back in the day where bots were hard scripted or hard coded. They weren't generative. And so we had to get specific phrases back from the customers. And we all know working with customers, sometimes they would take longer to respond or they would just totally not respond. And so then the CSM was stuck with, for these pretty large brands being the arbiter of the customer experience, which was challenging. And so CSMs were overwhelmed. What we also start to see from a customer perspective, though, is because the main value driver of having a bot in the first place is that it's able to complete the conversation and
Hmm.
handle a simple inquiry or simple request. And if it's not able to do that, that means that then a human agent needs to come in. And the whole purpose of buying Snaps at that time was to be able to have the bot handle the conversation entirely. So the value that we were meant to deliver, if you had a bad bot, meant that we couldn't deliver that value. So
Hmm.
our retention conversations became more challenging because, again, customers weren't seeing the value that they'd initially purchased. So, I think the first signs of this that we started to see was in the support tickets that were coming in. Customers
Hmm.
were saying, we need help with this. And to be honest, I think the blind spot for us or for me was that, we assumed that the customer would have resources themselves to own this over time, right? Because the whole implementation was we'll build it for you. We'll train you on it and your team can do it. We saw that that didn't happen, right? And
Right.
so the customer still required and still needed us to be the person and the team to deploy these things. I think the other blind spot was that, even if they did have a human being that was able to go in and configure things, they oftentimes didn't know how, right? In terms
Hmm.
of not just like the going in and configuring things, but in how to actually design a good conversation. And so we saw that the value that our team was able to provide too is that we had a set of best practices because we were deploying this across dozens of customers that we can then say, oh, if you're going to trigger a CSAT survey at the end of a conversation, here's when to do it. And here's how to phrase the question to get the optimal response rate, for example. So we
Right.
had a lot of these insights that was additional value add that even if our customer had a human on their side to do it, they didn't have a lot of that context as well. So that's sort of what was going on when we said, look, we got to do something different here.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen it in our own company development as well. And I just, in almost every company I've been at, I feel like there's this, you're so close to your own product that things that you take for granted in terms of like, yeah, you're technical. Of course, you're going to be able to easily be able to implement and utilize this solution. The things that
Right.
you take for granted within that process that suddenly become complete showstoppers for your customer can take a really long time to realize and kind of uncover. I'm curious, like you mentioned, just to kind of go back to it, it was the support tickets that were coming in. You were seeing, hey, these bots aren't working the way we expect them. I'm assuming actual churn amongst customers, like was that a lagging indicator that was actually happening, or was that a little bit less
That
problematic?
that was a lagging and that was definitely a lagging indicator, and the bot space even back then was highly competitive, even more so now. But and the challenge with that too, it was a hard renewal conversation, especially in churning some accounts, is that like it wasn't necessarily that the technology itself didn't work. It
Hmm.
was how you actually built it and how you
Hmm.
maintained it that was a challenge. So it became
Hmm.
a sourcing and an expertise issue. But we definitely did see, retention tanked a little bit. And then, of course, the other side of that is, even if, a customer didn't fully churn or contract, we weren't able to then expand them onto other products because a bit of the trust had been eroded, right? So it also impacted our ability to grow with them.
Yeah, totally. And so I'm really interested in kind of the solve, but before we get into it, I am also curious, like how did you connect the dots to say, okay, we have these tickets coming in.
Yeah.
This is like, how did you connect the dots to that challenge you called out of, okay, it's because they don't have the expertise we thought that they had, or they need more hand holding or whatnot.
I think it's a good question. I'm gonna cheat a little bit because I think it's because I had spent, the first part of my career as a management consultant, and I was like, listen, back in my consulting days, large companies would just pay us a ton of money just for our expertise. There was no
Hmm.
tools or technology involved,
Hmm.
right? So, when we started to see that there's so much value in our conversational design function, um, and in the process and in the best practices and in the benchmarks, our customers, every time they would talk to us, they would ask us like, well, how should we think about this? What so and so of your other customers are doing? Like, how should we design this flow? I said, look, there's a lot of value in that expertise, right? And so I know that we're SaaS, right? At the end of the day, we're valued more on, the product features and that part of the revenue. But there's also revenue to be had or value to be had. Let me start there
Hmm.
with being humans that are experts in this and being able to guide a customer, because at the end of the day, we're really selling change to them. I think now that we're really in the AI era, we can feel it. But back then it was
Hmm.
so early. And so it was like, yeah, like we're asking you to do things a little bit differently. You need a whole new set of skills and expertise to be able to do it well. So I think that for me was the dot connector of, maybe there's some way that we can further formalize this expertise instead of just saying, oh, this is your CSM and they do all the things. It's like,
Yeah.
well, the way that we have professional services and we have a solutions engineer and a solutions architect, maybe we need to start to codify a specific set of activities that then a role can fill and do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I see where you're starting to go with it, but maybe continuing on that thread of the actual
Yeah.
solution and kind of codifying that role. Kind of walk me through that.
Yeah, so the first, I think, solve was yes, to make it a specific role. I actually had a few of our CSMs do a bit of a time and motion study. This again, going back to my consulting days.
Hmm.
I actually spent a lot of time in call centers seeing how long it took agents to click through systems so we can
Hmm.
see if we can reduce the clicks from 10 to 8, there's savings there. So that's actually was my first few projects as a baby management consultant. So I
Hmm.
took the same approach and I wanted to understand what CSMs spend their time doing. And if I can actually distill down the activities and then apply a value to those activities, what that could look like. I also developed a way to look at more reactive things, so how much time they spent, responding to support tickets versus, net new time to be proactive. And so what we came up with is a list of, activities or things that they did across more strategic proactive work and then a bit more reactive, let's say bot maintenance and bot support work. And so from that list of the bot maintenance and bot support work, we're like, okay, well, can we actually develop what we call them, again, going back to my consulting days, deliverables? Can we package this in a way that actually is value added so it's not always reactive and we can actually get ahead of this? So if we deployed a new bot, let's actually put that bot through a stabilization period. And at the end of that stabilization period, we'll come up with a set of baseline metrics that then we can improve over time. So that was a set of activity.
Hmm.
So that was sort of how we structured, first starting from an activity and deliverables basis to then saying, well, look, if we actually had one conversational designer, this person can do these set of repeatable things across all of our customers at that time. And then that would free up a portion of the CSM activity so that they can fully go be CSMs. So it kind of started bottoms up from activities to package deliverables and then said, hey, there's enough of a role to at least have one of these experts help us across our customers. So I'll stop there. But there's a
Yeah.
second part of that too that I think was really insightful as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious to get into that, and just quickly a couple follow ups on that initial thread. Uh, if this was today, I would say, wow, the time and motion study, you should have used LumoPath. We could have gotten that quickly for you. But for companies that don't
Yeah.
have a solution in place, like, can you kind of walk through just like what does the 30-second kind of walkthrough of what does a time and motion study do? Like, how did you do that for your team?
So traditional time and motion studies, again, is, how many clicks on a system or something like that. But I modeled what we ended up doing from that. But what I had our CSM's teams do, and it was manual to start. I think to your point, there's technology today that can help fill that gap. But it's to, within a day, every time they had to switch a task or an activity, log whatever that task or activity was. And so after a week's worth of that, we could see, okay, let's develop some categories. As again, the first split was, is this reactive or proactive, right? Are you
Hmm.
doing this activity because someone came to you with a question, or are you preparing for something because you want to actually provide a proactive touch point? And then from there, we drilled into specific categories. Are these support related? Is this, preparing for a QBR? Is this, logging a health item to update a health score? So we had, I think at that point, 8 to 10 different sort of like categories of like the work to be done. And
Hmm.
so starting from there, I mean, again, back then we did it manually. I just kind of, my pitch to CSMs who kind of complained about the manual task was, one, it's only a week. And two, my goal is actually to free up more of your time, right?
Right.
So give
Right.
me a little bit of this, and I can understand how much your work is reactive so that we can actually do less of that so I can free up your time to do the true strategic CSM work.
Yeah. It's not about micromanaging. It's about advocating for you and
That's
having the
right.
context to support you as an organization.
Exactly.
Totally
Yeah.
resonates with me. And so with that new team, like, did you, or with that new role that you were starting to define, two
Yeah.
questions on that. Were you, creating additional work, or was it just taking the existing work and splitting it up across new bodies?
A little bit of both. So the additional work that we created, as I mentioned earlier, was to actually package it as service offerings. So
Hmm.
again, there was a lot of activity that was done, but I knew if I needed to and if I wanted to formalize this role, there needed to be a more formalization of the work that was done. And so we
Hmm.
spent time thinking about how do we want to package a set of offerings or services that this person can then do. And some of that was actually proactive. So, the we ended up creating this conversational design role based off of some of the, again, reactive support tickets, questions that our customers asked. But we said, look, if we actually had a dedicated person to think about this stuff, there's some proactive work and some strategic work they could align here too. So instead of waiting for a customer to say, hey, like my bot's not responding well to this FAQ, the conversational designer would spend X percentage of their time every week proactively reviewing conversations and saying, hey, the bot didn't respond well to that. I'm going to now proactively develop some more content, some more intents to fill that gap. So there was net new work that was created from it because we now had a dedicated person that could give more time to it.
And so then the natural follow up for me to that is, were you charging for that? Was like, if you're adding more work, was it just, hey, it costs more to support our customers, or we are making money off of this?
So that was the part two of the unlock was that so what ended up happening, so I had one person on the team. She was actually a former UX designer, became a CSM, and so she was the first person I tapped. Her name was Amanda, and I was like, Amanda, like if we had this formal role, is this something you'd be interested in? And she's like 100%. She's like, I love doing this, like I'm good as a CSM and like I like doing CSM, but if I could actually focus and spend more time just doing this, that would be amazing. So she was just sort of our like test subject on,
Hmm.
is this something that one is going to be a value added role? Can we create some specific service offerings around it? And then the second question was, can we actually charge for this? I thought we could because again, I came from management consulting and people paid for my brain. So I'm like, why wouldn't
Yeah.
they pay for a manager's brain? And so, we tested it out in terms of some package offerings that we said, okay, if we sell you this bot, like, would you find it valuable to then, spend some one's resources and time to maintain that bot? And at first, I do think that it was a little bit of a hard sell initially, especially for new customers that are never deployed bots because they didn't know what they didn't know. They actually didn't know that they would need someone to fully manage this on their side. And if they didn't, they'd have poor outcomes. The
Yeah.
other thing is that while we did end up like, managed services, we do end up charging for it now, which is great for expansion and growing revenue with the company. On certain accounts, we didn't. Certain accounts that were like, hey, this is code red. Like, we need a conversational designer to come in here and like get us back on track just to save the account. That's something that we just did and we just offered it, right? But I think either way it became a value added thing that, for customers that saw value in it because they knew that they needed resources to maintain it, they could easily sign up for it. But it also became a set of, I think, services and offerings that we could do to save accounts as well, even if a customer wasn't directly paying for it.
Yeah, and we could probably have a whole like session just on what I'm about to ask, but I'll ask you to
Yeah.
somehow keep the answer brief because it's a loaded question. But like, how did you navigate that difficult question of like, if the expectation is that the product just works, but you're telling me that it won't work unless I get this service, like how do you
Yeah.
navigate that from a packaging perspective with your customers?
Yeah, it is tough to think about that because I think people buy a tool or software and they want to do the thing. And like you said, it just works and they see the value off the other side of it. But I think when we think about maybe our segment of enterprise organizations, like it's never just a tool. there's so much change and there's so much process that goes in and around it. And especially also, I think the other dimension for us is what we were selling was a new technology entirely, a new category. I think, again, we can
Right.
appreciate that now in the AI era, but back then it was still very early. So I think the customers that very quickly were able to buy into it understood that their organizations change management needed assistance. We were asking them to do very different things fundamentally and introduce a very innovative technology. They knew that they needed help. Again, these are organizations that buy management consulting services, right?
Right. Right.
I think that the harder association is, well, I'm buying software, right? Why
Yeah.
do I also need to buy people?
Hmm.
But again, it was something that I think for folks that eventually ended, and I'll add that it became, especially in year two, when we started offering it just like as a, we'll do this, and we actually started with, well, we'll do this, we'll waive this fee just so you can like
Yeah.
see the value in it.
Yeah.
And then once they did, they were like, okay, yeah, it makes sense to, we've budgeted for it already, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think even in introducing some of this, if the value's not there, it's gonna be definitely challenging. But even if you introduce it as a free or waived line item to start, you
Yeah.
can show that over time and you can add on over time.
Yeah, I love that. That like maintaining the flexibility to eventually charge for it by just communicating it as something that has
Yeah.
value that you should pay for, but let's get
Yeah.
you
And
eased
look,
into.
yeah, I'm actually a big believer too, especially for software companies, you know, give away services,
Yep.
especially when you're early. Give it away because, like, that is your retention play. That's your adoption play, right? And if
Yep.
you need customers to just like get the value, and sometimes you got to throw bodies at it and throw resources at it, like, just do it, right?
Yeah.
So I think over investing, especially upfront from a provider perspective, is something that we often have to do anyway.
Totally. And it makes a ton of sense. And then I guess I'm curious, like you're already alluding to some of it, but just any like official impact and KPIs maybe that even came out of this that you started to track the success of the initiative.
That's right. I mean, we developed a whole new set of, metrics to measure bot performance. And it was so interesting because, now if you Google conversational designers, it's a formal role, job, function. I'm actually on the Conversational Design Institute nonprofit as a board member
Mm.
because now it's a formalized profession. But back in 2017, 2018, we were concepting this. It was still sort of like, wait, are people doing this? Like, is this going to be a thing? I relate it to, 30 years ago, there was no social media management,
Yeah.
right? It didn't
Yeah.
exist. There was no social media. So, right as bots were becoming more commonplace, this whole new category of conversational design became an actual skill. And so, yes, we had a whole new set of metrics to measure bot performance and to, of course, track that back to true operational metrics as well.
Hmm.
So, that was great to see, to
Yeah.
be part of that innovation as well.
Super cool. And I know so many people who are listening. Everyone is going through the challenge of how do I make the case for headcount? How do I build my team and communicate to the powers that be that I need
Yeah.
these resources? Any tips in terms of like you were asking for an entirely new role, not only just like hiring more people, just
Yeah.
in terms of the sell, like internally, anything beyond the time study and how you communicated the need that is worth passing on?
Yeah. I think especially for SaaS, professional services exist, right? Like it's a category. And I think if you can tie a set of friction points to value that a customer is going to value. And if you can try to quantify that value, again, make a business case for it. I
Yeah.
didn't at the time, but like if I could, I needed to go back to that. I think I would have tied that to, retention. I would have tied that to like shorter time to value, shorter time to expansion, right? I think there would have been a clearer, at least correlation there, if
Hmm.
not direct causation. And so I think, yeah, like what is the value metric? Like what needle are you trying to move? Like build your own internal business case as best you can, would be the way to, yeah, really prove the worth of it.
Awesome. Yeah. I love everything about this story and it resonates so deeply with me as we're building out an AI native new technology, figuring out the right structure for our organization. Like so much of it is the exact same challenges that we've been going through, and a lot of similar approaches as well. I'm curious if you just had like one most important takeaway that you'd want that you took from this experience. What would it be?
Yeah, like truly understanding your customer's journey with the product, how they use it, how they're not using it, right? Become an expert in that. And where you see friction point is opportunity, right? I think, sometimes we want to like shy away from it and we'll just say, well, it's, our customer needs to figure it out on their own. Like, we're not management consultants, like, doing change management for them, but we are, right? And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
the thing you can actually try to solve for to make adopting your technology easier for them is where there's value and where there could be an unlock. So, yeah, that would be my one big takeaway.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I've been in the situation. If you have five clients that are telling you, "Hey, I'm having trouble with X, Y, and Z," and product is telling you it's actually pretty easy. It's a expected behavior of the app. That's on them. Once you see that consistent thread, it is no longer, no matter how simple it is in your mind, you need to solve that problem. And it seems
Right.
like you did an incredible
Right.
job of rallying the
Yeah.
troops around that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a them problem. It's a you problem. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Any last takeaways that you want to leave listeners with?
No, I mean, I think what's exciting is, these specialized roles or new roles continue to exist, right? Like, so I'm interested in what, post sales, or like I like to call it, kind of, you know, post initial sales teams look like. I think we're seeing already, especially with, companies like Lumopath, more AI native companies are thinking about delivery very differently. So very curious to see what customer success and other functions look like in terms of adding value to our customers.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for joining, Ejieme. A pleasure as always. And if anyone hasn't checked out the Customer Success Talent Playbook, I highly recommend it. It's a great read, and you can hear more from Ejieme and her perspective on CS. Thank you, and looking forward to the next one.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Mikey.